blessed morning on the day 4 of the Feast of Tabernacles. We are halfway through the 8 days of the Feast of Tabernacles for 2021. We are now on the 4th day and we are still having more for 4 days. In other places, when they go towards the weekend, towards the Sabbath, they are packing, they are starting to pack, but they don't know that the feast goes until the Tuesday, so that it fulfills its 8 days as God has commanded. I want to welcome you all in the comfort of your homes, so we can continue to proclaim the appointed hours of which were ordained by God, as per letter. So we were seeing yesterday when we were studying this topic about these 3 sisters and their mother. We had a mother in the ancient Old Testament period, which is called the ancient Jerusalem. And then we have a modern Jerusalem, which we have seen in the Christian era as we started. We have seen that this modern Jerusalem had 2 sisters. So they became 3 sisters, meaning we saw on verse 45, 45, and 46 of Ezekiel chapter 16 that this Jerusalem had a bigger sister, an elder sister called Samaria, and then a smaller sister called Sodom. So we see amongst these 3 sisters, one of them has got the covenant of God. And the covenant of God, the last covenant of God, is going to be established on one of them, which we identified as Jerusalem. And we saw that Jerusalem in the Old Testament, we saw Jerusalem had 2 tribes of Israel were given mercy, as we saw in Hosea chapter 2, chapter 1, verse 7. Mercy means God had mercy with the 2 tribes, and that's why some of them were left in the Holy Land. When Christ came the first time, he found them there. But the 10 tribes, which were under Samaria, when they were worshipping, they were not worshipping even at the door of the entrance in Jerusalem, as we saw in Exodus chapter 29, verse 42 up to 45. You see that where they were worshipping was at the door of the entrance. Why would they worship at the door of the entrance? We saw that that's where they found the voice of God was there. And God also promised that at that door of the entrance, he will meet with the priests, he will meet with the leaders, and meet also with the congregation and sanctify both the leaders and the congregation at the door of the entrance. But the 10 tribes were also under Jeroboam, who ordained a feast which was on a wrong date, on the 8th month of the 15th day of the 8th month, instead of the 15th day of the 7th month. This is Jeroboam leading the 10 tribes under the place where called Samaria. And also another feast was ordained at Dan. So the feasts were all over the places. They were not centered at one location as it was with God. God said 3 times a year you should go and observe the feast where I have placed my name. So where did he place his name? In Jerusalem. But we see Samaria, 10 tribes, and they were ordaining a feast at Bethel, which was in Samaria, and also in Dan, all over the places. So we know this prophecy, where there is no type, there is no truth. The type was showing an antitype of a Jeroboam in our time, ordaining a feast all over the places, not going at the door of the entrance of the tabernacle 3 times a year in Jerusalem. So we know from prophecy where things are coming from and where they are going. And we know who you are, even if you profess to be the children of God. But we know which department of the children of God you are. Because we have 3 sections. We have one called Samaria and one called Jerusalem, the other one called Sodom. All of them from one mother, all of them from one denomination, but one is practicing in character, looks like Samaria. In character, looks like Jerusalem. In character, looks like Sodom. So that's why we are studying. We have to study and understand have all these sections in one house of God? Why? Why does Laodicea have all these 3 departments? Unless you study these prophecies in the Old Testament, you never come up with the truth. We come up with the truth from the prophets. That's why God said, study the Old Testament prophecies. They are them which testify of Christ. So you won't know about what is happening now without knowing from the Old Testament. So we know when people are not keeping the dates of the camp meetings and ordaining them all over the places in different dates, we know they are under the heading Samaria. One of the sisters of the 3 sisters. So let's go deeper about this ordaining of the feast in Samaria instead of going at the door of the entrance in Jerusalem, where the voice of God had been promised to come and sanctify the whole congregation, sanctify the whole leadership. But they were evading that place. Why would they evade? Now, I'm asking, in our present time, is there a time where the church refused to worship at the door of the entrance? Is there? I say yes, there is. The answer is yes, there is. They refused to worship at the door of the sanctuary in Jerusalem. When was that? Right? They adopted a form of worship in Samaria in different dates of the Feast of Tabernacles. It's there. We see it. That's why they don't bother about the dates. That's why they don't bother about the place of worship. They avoid to go to the sanctuary where God has said 3 times a year in Deuteronomy 16 verse 16, 3 times you have to go at the door of the entrance where you will meet the voice of God, where the voice of God will speak and sanctify the priests, the leaders, and the congregation. We know in the last days it is predicted in Isaiah chapter 2 verse 2 that the voice will come from the top of the mountain, from Zion. So why is the voice not coming from Zion? Why? It's coming from Samaria, from Dan, from Bethel, instead of coming from Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Why is this voice not coming from everywhere? You know from the prophets. We read the prophets, and the prophets will make us sure, upright, and we worship God following his word. Do you understand? Now, is there a time the house of God refused to worship at the door of the sanctuary in Jerusalem? Yes, there is. Did they adopt another form of worship? Yes, they did. Of wrong dates, of wrong places, Bethel, Dan, everywhere. We will prove that point. Let's prove that point in 1888. What happened there? What happened? You might not have been there, but we are following a history of our own people. What happened in 1888? What happened? They refused the 1888 message, which was sending them back to the door of the entrance of the sanctuary. What were those boys bringing, A.T. Jones and Wakona? What were they bringing? They were bringing us to worship back at the door of the sanctuary. What were they bringing? It was the ceremonial law. You can read it for yourself and see that it was the law of Galatians that they were preaching of the schoolmaster, which Sister White admitted that the schoolmaster which will send us to Christ, which will give us the righteousness of Christ, is both the moral and the ceremonial law. This was sending us to the door of the sanctuary in Jerusalem. And it's chronicled in black and white. That was refused. So when they refused to worship at the door of the entrance, where the voice could be heard from God and sanctify the congregation and the leadership. So what, did they remain idle? No. They ordained another form of worship, which has nothing to do with the dates, which have nothing to do with the place of worship, like it was with Samaria. That's why we prove there was a split in 1888. There were 2 groups formed. The few who went along with A.T. Jones and Wakona were under the leadership of Judah, of Jerusalem. And those, the Uriah Smith and Lake, who also refused to take the 1888 message, were under Samaria. That's where there was a demarcation of the two groups there. That's where there was Jerusalem, which are the people, Sister White, A.T. Jones, and Wakona, were on the side of Judah, or those who worship in Jerusalem. So it's one of the sisters, which is Jerusalem. The other sister, which developed in 1888, were the Uriah Smiths, and everyone. Go to the background of the pioneers, and you see how they fought. And Uriah Smith went on to write even the prophecies. So Daniel refused the preacher, and while Sister White was stopping him to write all those things, he did stop. If you want, I can give you a full history of it, how they were interacting with Sister White. That was forming what a group called Uriah, a group called Samaria, under Uriah Smith and the likes. So you gauge and see which one of the two you belong to. If you belong to those who are still on Daniel reveals the future from Uriah and everything, you are all under Samaria. And also, if you belong to the spirit of prophecy under Sister White and A.T. Jones and Wekwana, and also receive the feast, the ceremonial system brought by A.T. Jones and Wekwana, you are under the group of Jerusalem. That's where the covenant of the 144,000 will be established. Never ever will you find the 144,000 on Samaria. Never. That one I bet. You can check at last and check whether Samaria went anyway. That's why Zechariah 6 will come to you and say there were two sets of horses leading the church from that time. One is the grizzled, pulling to the south country. The other one is the bay horse, pulling all over, was given permission to have a gospel which goes all over the world. That's why we come to you in BSM TV right now with the message which goes all over in four corners of the world. Someone was asking me a good question. Where are you best? Let me tell you where I'm best. Four corners of the world, that's where I'm best. Where the gospel has been permitted under one of the sisters, which is Jerusalem, which were the two tribes, they continued from 1888. These two tribes, they continued, they are under the name Judah. And also those who refused the 1888 message are under the name Samaria. This is a history which occurred in our history. You can't deny it. You go to the book 1 of selected messages, page 233 and 234, and study for yourself and see how this development occurred. You see? So when we are studying here, we study together with history, and history confirms what we are talking about from what God has laid in the history, in the book, in the Bible, from Ezekiel chapter 16, which we are studying, which developed these three sisters in verse 45, 46. See, one is called Samaria. Where did Samaria come from? From refusing A.T. Jones and Wakwana. Then a group called Samaria, a sister called Samaria developed with 10 tribes there. These 10 tribes, so many of them, but why? They have no dates of the feast. They ordain feasts anyway. They ordain meetings anyway, which you can't find in the Bible. You can find there. They have got rallies and soldiers marching and everything. This is what Jeroboam can tell you. Jeroboam can do that. Yeah, in Samaria. He's got anything that comes from his head. But those who are worshiping from the door of the entrance, they have the voice of God coming where? At the door of the entrance in Jerusalem. Keeping the feast 3 times a year, as in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 16. Right? Where is the voice coming from? From the door of the entrance in Jerusalem. And where are the dates? From the Bible, where God has put the Bible and all this. These two groups will continue to be there when we are talking about those who believe the spirit of prophecy. Under Sister White, there was this development of this other sister who doesn't even want. But that's why when Sister White died, they made sure they don't replace her. Because they were fighting the spirit of prophecy. Samaria with the spirit of prophecy. There is nowhere in the 8 gifts in Ephesians we find in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 verse 28, the 8 gifts. There is no way when a pastor should be replaced by a prophet, or an evangelist or a teacher should be replaced by a pastor. No, when a pastor dies, another pastor will replace. When a prophet dies, another prophet should replace. So why remain with less gifts at the time when the world is so dark? We know what happened with Samaria. Samaria did not replace the prophet, but those who worship under the door, because there's somewhere where the voice of God should go. The voice of God doesn't go anywhere in all the 8 gifts, but in the gift of prophecy. In the gift of prophecy, that's why in Amos chapter 3 verse 7 says, he will look for the prophets. When there is any secret he wants to divulge, the prophet. That's why you find at the door of the entrance, where they were worshipping in Jerusalem, there was a prophet. But Samaria can do as he likes, or she likes. This sister, she can do anything. When the prophet dies, she replaces the prophet by pastors. And then they now call you, they say we are now the voice of God. The voice of God was the prophet from the beginning to the end. The voice of God is the prophet, it's not a pastor. But they now want to replace everyone in Samaria. You find is saying, I've got a message from God. I've got. You find what is happening in the 10 tribes in Samaria. I've got this. I've been sent. Also carrying the Bible and pretending to be a voice of God. But the voice of God is found under Jerusalem, at the door of the entrance, where the voice of God is. Peradventure, I don't know. Go to Exodus chapter 29 and verse 42 up to 44. You find where the voice is. I will meet them at the door of the entrance. Where? In Jerusalem. Not in Samaria. Not everywhere else. Not in Samaria. Now we are talking of something that would make sense from this Feast of Tabernacle. When it finishes, you say, I've learned something. I've learned something valuable in my life. Like somebody who has got a lottery to know exactly where the blessings come. Which channel do we get the blessings? From the door of the entrance. From Samaria. From Jerusalem, not from Samaria. Samaria, look, let them be as many as they want. Worshipping as they like. But the thing is that the syllabus, they don't have it. They don't have the syllabus. If they don't have a prophet, who will give them the syllabus? Nobody. It never changes that when a prophet dies, you replace a prophet by a pastor or an evangelist or a teacher or whatever. The prophet is replaced by a prophet, and the prophet continued at the door of the entrance. And Samaria will never guess what was happening in Jerusalem. Never guess. Now, let me see what we can proceed like. So in 1890, the rejection was sealed. Now, let's see. But then what happened then in Jerusalem? Since Sister White died in 1915, then we saw a guy coming in 1930. We saw a guy coming who was a Sabbath school pastor who God inspired to lead the people after Sister White. Yes, Sister White actually didn't say I was the last prophet. She didn't say so. Go to see what she wrote. Go to early writing, page 277. She did not say she was the last angel's message. She didn't say that. Yeah, she clearly said in other texts, in Way to the Little Flock, page 10.5, she clearly said there are 5 messages coming. She was on the 3rd message, on the 3rd angel's message. She clearly said there are 5. Right? You can say, oh, it's James, it's his husband, it's the wife. They would never write anything without her approval. Now let's hear from early writing. Did she say she was the last prophet? 277. Right? Listen to what she said.
I saw angels
right?
hurrying to and fro in the heaven, descending to the earth and again ascending to heaven, preparing for the fulfillment of some important event.
Right?
Then I saw another mighty angel.
Did she see angels still coming after her angel's message? She saw angels hurrying to and fro. And what? Then
I saw another mighty angel commissioned to descend to the earth to unite his voice with the third angel and give power and force to his message.
Right?
Great power and glory were imparted to the angel. And as he descended, the earth was lightened with his glory.
So did you see another message coming? To give power to the third. Then I have said another somebody saying, now we now on the fourth angel, meaning the Revelation chapter 18. Then they say they now on the fourth. But then I said, okay, thank you very much for being on the fourth angel. But who then is the prophet? Because the third angel is the prophet. So you are on the fourth. So who then is the prophet of the fourth? Now is it the pastor now who is turned to be the prophet? But we know what is happening in Samaria. There is no prophet there. It's outside Jerusalem. There's no prophet in Samaria. Like it was with Jeroboam. He attended a feast. He was not even a prophet. He was a king. King Jeroboam. He was not even a prophet. There's no prophet out there. When they went into Jerusalem, the prophets took their own job description and made sure the voice of God was going through the prophet to the people, to the congregation, to the priest, to everyone. There, Jeroboam, you can go and the ordained feast in Bethel and everywhere, in Dan, everywhere, but without prophets. We know there's nothing happening there. As long as you profess with your own mouth, there's no prophet. There is no other word. You only stick to what was said by the prophet was then before she died. Sister White, what she said, then that's what you stick to that. And it's so clear. They're sticking to the third. That's where Sister White was preaching the third. That's what is in Samaria. But the prophets are there in this other sister, Jerusalem. Where do they hear the voice? From the door of the entrance in Jerusalem. 3 times a year, on the 3rd hour, on the 9th hour. This is where the prophets are working. And that's why you won't hear what this prophet is saying. Because you are in Samaria. 10 tribes everywhere. We can see, we can prove what was happening to Jeroboam. Wrong dates. And we have wrong dates. We can see what was happening to Jeroboam. Wrong times of Lord's Supper. Yes, you are telling people there in Samaria that the supper is in the afternoon. We know exactly what you are doing. This is what is in the prophets. And we are boldly saying it. And we are not scared to say it because God has sent us to say it. We will say it. You are ordaining feasts as you like. And other names of feasts which are not in the Bible. Yeah. So let me tell you one thing. There is no way you can prosper without prophets. Come to this sister Jerusalem. It's predicted at the door of the entrance. That's where this sister will get all her advices from God's voice. That's where the voice is. The voice of God is not everywhere else like Jeroboam thought it was in Dan, it was in Bethel, it was in Jerusalem. That's where the voice of God was, in Jerusalem. That's why you hear all this freshness of truth coming from the Bible you hold, which Jeroboam cannot tell you. Jeroboam cannot tell. There's no prophet there. Let me tell you one thing. The job of a prophet, let's hear. Want to see what the job of the prophet is. And if you don't have a prophet in Samaria there, you are lacking that job. Let's go to Revelation. Yeah? First start with John 16. John 16. Verse 13. What is the job of the prophet? What's the job? If you have no prophet, you're done in Bethel, everywhere, in wrong dates and everything. There's no prophet. What is the job of the prophet? Let's hear the job of the prophet. Yeah.
John 16 verse 13.
16 verse 13.
Howbeit, when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you into all truth.
Right.
For he shall not speak of himself.
So you see, even the truth was not there. Even the truth of the gender of the Spirit wasn't there. Until the Spirit comes, will guide you into truth so that you know when there is a family there, you will see the terms father, the terms mother, the terms son, they are there. So like it is in your house. You understand? So it's a pity. It's a pity. Because I had an argument with another brethren who was saying, you're telling me that there is a mother in heaven. I said, yes, there is. There's a mother in heaven. Much as there's a mother in your house. Says, I will never, the brethren said, I will never agree that there is a mother in heaven. I will never. The brethren say so. I will never. I will agree everything else about keeping the feast and everything. But that brethren said, It was a man. I will never agree there is a woman. And let me tell you that after a couple of, I don't know, it's a couple or next week or something like that. I don't know. It was close to that. The time he actually said, I'll never agree there is a mother. I'll never. So the president sat and enjoyed the supper in his home. And the wife said, let me go and sleep. And the wife went to sleep. This is a thing that happened physically. The wife went to sleep. And after the wife was in bed, the president switched off the TV later on. Said, let me join my wife in the bed. But instead, went to the bed. What did he find? The wife was long gone, long passed on. It's a sad story. Let me tell you, it's a sad, very sad story. And when the president phoned me to say my wife died, I just found we were eating together, watching TV, everything, and she went to bed earlier. And when I joined, the wife was dead. I said, what? He says, yes, this is what happened, and this is what happened. But I only remembered that he had actually hit the floor to say, I will never agree that there is a woman in heaven. There is, until today, that brother did not marry again. He said, you will never agree that there is a woman. This is a living story, I'm telling you. It was after that argument. And I do not know what transpired. You can work out the maths yourself without me putting words into my mouth. But this is what happened in the following weeks. He found the woman who was dead in bed. And then I said, what is all this? So some of the things, you just solve them in your head and see what really happened. It's up to you to, whoever has ear, let him hear what the Spirit says. But when I'm saying, when the Spirit comes, the Spirit will lead you into all truth, including her own gender. This truth, when it says in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 14 to 15, says there is a family in heaven, and then you hear terminologies telling you that there's a father, terminology telling you that there's a son. So what is missing there? Then it says, when he was creating the earth, he says, let us make men in our image. So whose image is a woman? Tell me. Because the people who were created looked like the creators. So who looked like a woman? Now, it's up to you. It's a long story. But it's up to you to believe or not. The ball is in your hand to accept on. But we have been told there is a truth that had not been disclosed. Up until Christ promised the disciples that when the Spirit comes, we'll disclose the whole truth. So we know that the Spirit came after Christ ascended. On the day of Pentecost, the Spirit was poured and will lead us into the whole truth until the day Christ comes. We will have freshness of truth that we did not even know. We will learn. So you should be in a position to learn. What I've heard today is damnable. Sometimes you don't know. There is one person who should not be offended. It's the Spirit. You can offend the Father, and you can repent. And you can offend the Son, you can repent. But if you offend the Mother or the Spirit, you will never repent. God will never pardon that sin. It's an unpardonable sin. That's why even in customs, in other customs, they say, do not offend your mother. They say so. But they've never said, don't offend your father or don't offend your brother. He said, don't offend your mother, otherwise you will be like a fool. You will be crazy in the head once you offend the mother. So here we have a mother also. If we offend, that mother won't pardon us, because it's the mother who carries the children in the womb. The mother who has sleepless nights. 9 months carrying the children. That's why Christ was saying, you should be born again. Talking about the mother, the Spirit. You should be born again. Yeah? Because it's the mother who knows. Much as the Father says, it's my son, it's my daughter, but The experience of the mother, the father does not even know what the mother is going through. It's the Holy Spirit, which as children, we will be born of the Spirit. Now, let us go to our subject. We want to see the importance then of having a living spirit of prophecy. Because we have seen that the Spirit will lead us into all truth. Right? So if you declare, Samaria, that you don't have the voice of God, our movement of the third hour, of the third angel's message, was founded by the Spirit of prophecy. It's the Spirit of prophecy which made us different from other people. It's the Spirit of prophecy, is the prophet who actually informed us that Christ entered the Holy of Holies on 22 October 1844. So you can see we have got all these truths that other people don't have because we are the prophet. But when that prophet dies, there's still truths to come. But when you shun the prophet and say this gift of prophet, we never have it, we are only going to believe in this prophet or on the prophets who died, like Sister White, like Jeremiah, like Isaiah, they all died. Yes, their information is correct. But we need a prophet of our time who are living, who will continue to disclose the truth to us. Now here is saying, the Spirit will lead you into... let's go to Revelation chapter 2, verse 17. We want to see the reason why we should have a prophet in our midst, while Samaria there is Jeroboam leading, who is not a prophet, is a king. Now listen, let's read verse 17, Revelation 2, verse 17. Mm-hmm.
He that hath an ear,
right,
let him hear
right,
what the Spirit saith unto the churches.
Right. So what is it that speaks to the church? The Spirit. So if you have no living spirit of prophecy, what then are you supposed to be listening to? Listen to what the Spirit says to the church. And when he says we have got the Holy Spirit, we can't have the Holy Spirit without a prophet. The prophet is where the voice of God goes in Amos chapter 3, verse 7. It says clearly, if you have the Spirit, you have the prophet. But if you declare you don't have the Spirit, you don't have the prophet, then you don't even have the Spirit. That's why you are so stuck on the third, while others are on the fifth angel's message. You're stuck. Why? Because where the living Spirit who was there electrifying the church, where she died, that's where you are stuck there. And when in 1930, when V.T. Hotef came in 1930, you wouldn't see, because you're in Samaria there. You are in Samaria there. That's why V.T. Hotef came, was raised as a Sabbath school teacher, and started to preach the fourth angel's message. 1930, it happened. But would you know anything when you are there? When you actually had rejected A.T. Jones, which Sister White confirms that they had a message coming from God, would you then understand V.T. Hotef then, after that? Would you? Yeah, in Samaria there. Ordaining feasts, different dates, that are not in the Bible. Different. You are actually even labeling all the feasts that are in the pagan world. There. How would you guess the message from A.T. Jones? How would you guess the message from V.T. Hotef? How would you guess? Because they are at the door of the sanctuary in Jerusalem. You are Samaria there. You are Samaria there. Now let's hear. Let's hear on Revelation chapter 3, verse 19. We know 3 verse 19. Have you gone to 2 verse 17?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's go to 12 verse 17 again. Right? Mm-hmm.
12 verse 17.
Mm-hmm. So we see what is the work of the Spirit. Now let's go to 12 verse 17.
And the dragon was wroth with the woman,
Mm-hmm.
and went to make war with the remnant of her seed,
Right?
which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus
And
Christ.
what is the testimony of Jesus? It's the spirit of prophecy.
Yeah.
How would Samaria know there is a prophet? Because they were keeping the commandments and the testimony. They have a testimony. They have the prophet. And Samaria cannot have a prophet. Because these were keeping the commandments. And when you say the commandments and the laws of God and have a prophet, you can't have a prophet and not keep the statutes. The prophet, when the prophet is there, that's why Moses wrote the statutes. He was a prophet. And he wrote all the books, 5 books of the Bible, and was even conducting the statutes, the 3rd hours, the 9th hours. The priest was working under Moses, the prophet. That's why we needed a prophet for them to walk out of Egypt, to be preserved in the wilderness, and also to enter into Canaan. When Moses died, God did not say, now you know what Moses wrote. No, he had to raise another prophet, Joshua, to lead. Because there is no way God will operate without a prophet. Without a prophet at the door of the sanctuary. The prophet's office is at the door of the sanctuary. We have been promised, under 2,300 days shall the sanctuary be started. It is started in 1844. Sister White was the prophet at the door. And even when these 2 guys came, why? Because God wouldn't use Sister White. Because they already, the likes of the Samaritans who were there had rejected Sister White then. They were already questioning her. Why would they send her for mesmerism? Because they did not believe in Sister White. And God wouldn't send the message, with the 1888 message with Sister White. It was not going to be accepted. So God had to raise these 2 boys, A.T. Jones and Wagwan. And Sister White endorsed their message. It was for both the moral and the ceremonial law was supposed to be taken to bring us to Christ. Until today, Samaria didn't receive that message. And until today, we can see boldly, he is ordaining, Jeroboam is ordaining the feast everywhere with wrong dates, wrong times, and teaching his children to call daylight supper. And I don't know at night what they eat. Lunch. So it's all because he's not worshiping at the door of the sanctuary in Jerusalem. That's why we have 3 sisters. You have to assess yourself and see, which sister do I belong to? Is it Samaria? Well, yes, you'll be comfortable there, outside there, having different days of camp meeting. And some have camp meeting this week, some next week, yet there is one date. Like it is with the Sabbath. When it is Sabbath, tomorrow, everyone is in a Sabbath. And when it is the feast, everyone is in a feast. But what is Jeroboam doing? Ordaining in wrong days. This next week, do it. Next week, and taking them all to the bush to camp. All things that are not in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, go. Disciple Ages will tell you clearly. They put the booths in streets, in houses, in corridors, in what, just to show they walked out of Egypt. And now the other reason for us to keep the camp meeting is not the booths. It's the in-gathering, which we preach that we are supposed to gather. So there's no more booths for us. So Jeroboam is still stuck with the booths there, stuck with the booths and taking people to the, to practice sacrifice the whole week in the bush where there is no bed, no what, sleeping on the floor, sleeping on the sand and all the ants, everything. Why? Because he is not at the door of the sanctuary in Jerusalem, where he should be keeping this feast 3 times a year, and where the voice of God will command. And even Isaiah tells, in the last day, the voice will come out of Zion, for in Zion shall be deliverance. Jeroboam is busy in Bethel, busy in Dan, everywhere. He's busy, does not even know, and says, I'm the voice of God. Since when should a pastor be a voice of God? In the Bible, the gift is the gift of the prophet, which is the voice of God. Now let's hear what is the relevance of having a prophet? What is it? Yeah, living testimony of Revelation chapter 12, verse 17. They have, the testimony of Jesus. Now let's go to Isaiah chapter 8, verse 16.
Verse 16.
Mm-hmm.
Bind up the testimony.
Right?
Seal the law among my disciples.
Right?
And I will wait upon the Lord that hideth his face from the house of Jacob, and I will look for him.
Right. It says, bind up the testimony. Did you hear that? Bind up the testimony.
Seal the law.
Seal the law. So what is the use of having a prophet? To seal, to bind up the testimony. Now, do you see when we are in the feast right now, we are exhuming prophecies that are hidden in the book. That's the job of the prophet, to bind up the testimonies and give it to the people, so that people enjoy the testimonies God has written in his book. Bind up the testimonies. And also, what should the prophet do? Seal the law. Seal the law. Teach the people about the laws of God, the feasts, the statutes, the commandments, the testimonies. Put them together. Don't tell me that, oh, they've got a mountain of testimonies, of quotations from Sister White. That's the job of a prophet, to bind up these testimonies and give the people to understand the voice of God. This is the reason why we should have the gift of prophecy in our midst as a living person. Right? In Samaria, they don't have this. You go with all this information. They're so confused where you're coming from and where you're going. They don't even know what you're talking about. But it's there at the door of the entrance of the tabernacle in Jerusalem. One sister is where God will announce his covenant people. In the last day, the feast, and one of the feasts, the one for 4,000, will be standing on Mount Zion with the lamp, with whose prophet has bound up all the testimonies they have learned and all the laws. The dragon was wroth with them because they had all the laws, the commandments, and have also the testimony, which is the spirit of prophecy, which is living around us. You see, they don't have it in Samaria. Don't worry about it. Don't worry how many there are. Because in Judah it was only 2 tribes. And in Samaria was 10 tribes of Israel. So don't worry about that. Now, don't worry about that, right? So this is what Sister White used to do. That was her job when she was alive. She was electrifying the church every time she was alive. Why? She was binding all. That's why we have lots of books that she wrote. She was binding up the testimonies for the church to be electrified by the presence of the spirit of prophecy in their midst, which was living. And this continued with V.T. Hotef from 1930 to come up with a group which was called Davidians, right? But we are saying they also should continue with the prophet. They know exactly that V.T. Hotef died. So most of them copied what Samaria did. Because when V.T. Hotef died, they should also look for another prophet. Because where there is no prophet, where there is no prophet in their midst, there was no truth, there was no continuation. They needed to continue. So now let's see. Let's see from our chapter is chapter 16. Yeah, chapter 16. Go to chapter 16 of Ezekiel. You know, our main subject was Ezekiel chapter 16. That's where I want you to go. Right?
Ezekiel 16.
Right. We went up to which verse yesterday?
17, I think.
No, 40 something.
Oh.
Yeah, it's 40 something. Right? Go to
47.
47. Right. Yeah.
Yet has okay, let's start from.
Right.
Thou art thy mother's daughter, that loateth her husband and her children, and thou art the sister of thy sisters, which loathe their husbands and their children. Your mother was an Hittite, and your father an Amorite.
Right, that's the point I want. Okay. So we saw this sister continued also to be a descendant from the Hittites and the Amorites. So we saw yesterday that these Hittites and the Amorites, they were so idolatrous, so wicked. They did not want to continue with the covenant like they did with, we saw the whole history in the Old Testament where they, even in the time when they were flourishing with the King David and King Solomon, they did not go with the covenant. They broke it, had many wives. So what we find with Samaria, the main thing we find with Samaria, now I know you know who Samaria is. The main thing we find with Samaria is the Samaria has nothing to do with God's law, especially the festivals. Nothing. But Samaria is fully packed with the pagan feasts. Fully packed. Right? that even they even take even the Christmas tree and put it among themselves to prove they are Samaria. So listen, now you see the notion that the feasts were nailed to the cross, where it is coming from Samaria. Those worshipping at the door of the entrance in Jerusalem will never nail the feast, because that's where the voice of God continues. In the feast, that's why we find them come. In Nahum chapter 1 verse 15 says, what does it say? Let's hear. And the last day, on the last day, listen to what Nahum says. Yeah? Verse 15, chapter 1 verse 15. The feast will never be nailed. And when you talk to Samaria and say, are you telling me that the feast were nailed? When we have even still the Day of Atonement in 1844. And when we have even the Day of Pentecost after 50 days after Christ had long gone. And when we have even the time of the Dark Ages, when these feasts were being changed, I tell you, Samaria won't even reason. They don't even reason about it. Why? Because their reasoning is not controlled by the voice of God from the door of the entrance in Jerusalem. Now listen, now chapter 1 verse 15. Are we still having the feast right until the last day? Listen to that.
Behold upon the mountains
Right?
the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace. O Judah, keep thy solemn feasts, perform thy vows,
Right?
for the wicked shall no more pass through thee. He is utterly cut off.
Right. So I told you yesterday that, do you know what? What Samaria is worried about is to make more numbers of people. We saw it in Hosea. That he says, I'll go after my lovers who give me bread. The Samaria is worried about numbers. And doesn't even care whether the numbers come with their own ideologies and own customary things. It doesn't care about that as long as they pay their tithe. It worries more. Jeroboam worries more about numbers. So this perversion, where did it come from? From the converts. The converts who come more and more, they're coming nailing the feasts from Samaria then. Because that's what was happening. So this is to avoid this erroneous idea that the Sabbath also, they also want even the Sabbath also to be nailed to the cross, these converts. So now Samaria tries to make sure they don't go to nail the Sabbath, otherwise they will come up clear to be against the Sabbath keeping people. You understand? So to avoid this erroneous idea that the Sabbath was also nailed to the cross, what happened to the pioneers? I'm telling you what history tells us. What the pioneers did, because they nailed all the feasts, and they try to justify about the camp meeting, and they say, sometimes they say it's not even a camp meeting, it's a revival. They try to justify about the Lord's Supper. No, we do oftenly. You see, they try all those things, but then the converts are coming and pushing Samaria to say, let's even blot even the Sabbath. You understand? So the pioneers, to avoid blotting also the Sabbath, nailing to the cross, yeah? They now said, no, we have two laws. There are two laws. One is moral and one is ceremonial. And they will tell you that in the ark, you find what is called the moral. But they will tell you that, but the ceremonial is not right in the ark, it's on the sides of the ark, right? That's where they were kept, and on the side, they are not kept right inside the ark. So that's why we are abolishing the feasts, because they were on the side. But this one, which was right inside the ark, is what we now keep. These are the reasons coming from Samaria, you know. So the notion to nail the feast, did not originate from the pioneers. The pioneers didn't say the feasts were nailed. But we know it came from the converts who were flooding the church. Like it is in Revelation chapter 12, verse 17. It says, verse 15, it says, now when the woman fled to the wilderness, so many converts came, which is says the dragon took so much water and flooded to the woman. So these converts coming, these Protestants coming with all these notions. And then he said, no, we are now only, you can blot also the feast because they were on the side of the ark. But this one, which was inside the ark, is the moral law, is what we keep. Do you understand? So they make all these explanations so that those flaunting, they are not obliged to keep the feast. They now stress on them to keep the Sabbath. This is what the pioneers were doing. So in order to substitute this distinction, that they have to deny that the moral law contains a ceremonial element. They don't want to admit that the moral law had some element of ceremonial. Does it have some element of ceremonial? Yes. What element? Because they are still going to church on Sabbath. That's an element of ceremonial. Because the moral law does not say go to church on Sabbath. No. So in the moral law, when they want to keep this, the pioneers, when they wanted to keep the Sabbath, they said, instead of resting at home, let's go to come together. So instead, they are now keeping this moral law with some ceremonial concept. And then they say, they don't want to blot that. They don't want to blot that because if you are to keep the 10 Commandments only, so why are you going to church? Why are you going to convocate? Because it's only on a feast. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 1 to 4. That's when you find the Sabbath. It says it's a convocation. It's a first feast on that chapter. So when you keep that first feast on that chapter, why not keep the rest of the chapter? You have already said that chapter is good. You are keeping that first feast. By convocating, that's a feast. There is no way we are commanded in the 10 Commandments to convocate. So they wanted the Protestants to believe that now we are keeping the moral, but they only want also to make a distinction with those who are keeping feast by saying our keeping the 10 Commandments we want also to come together. But they don't know that by coming together they are on Leviticus 23. This is what the pioneers were. And the books, that book also, on the side of the ark, the ceremonial law, is full of, they say it's full of moral principles. What are these moral principles? The other, it says all those on the side of the ark, it's got moral principles. So this is why we also accept these moral principles. They also, have to dissect, that book into even smaller and smaller parts. Because the first one of the feast in Leviticus 23, you see, it's a smaller part. They dissected the 10 Commandments to say to accommodate the feast of the Sabbath, so that they are seen also convocating. You see, there is some dissection, but the rest of the feast, they are not. They also further continue with the ceremonial law on tithe. Did you understand? So that when we convocate, then they say, you pay your tithe. They can't even prove to you that this is a ceremonial law. No, they say this is a requirement. They're go touching the ceremonial law, but they prove we are only on the moral, but they're touching it on the Sabbath, coming together, which the 10 Commandments does not command. And also the 10 Commandments does not command any tithe. It's a ceremonial law. So they dissect and pick and choose what could do, explaining to these new converts. You understand? Let me tell you one thing. Samaria has a lot to change. That's why God says in early writings, page 60, says we have a lot to unlearn, and many things to learn. And a lot, you cannot just pick and choose and pick and that's why God said that's Babylon. It's confusing. It's confusing because once you say you are only keeping one law, which is moral, stick to it. Why dissecting and also pinching some of these ceremonial elements coming with them, and then you would say we're no longer keeping the ceremonial law. The very Sabbath, when you go to church, you are keeping the ceremonial law. And the very tithe, when you demand it, it's a ceremonial law. Yeah. The very clean meats which are there, it's a ceremonial law. So when you want to base your faith on the moral So they're picking and picking and picking so that they don't come up clear, distinct to say they're not God's people. You understand? So this is what is happening. Samaria tries by all means to evade Jerusalem, to evade what God has said. You have to keep it in Jerusalem. Let's go to a verse. Chapter 7, Revelation, chapter 7, verse 17. Chapter 7, verse 17. Yeah.
For the Lamb, which is in the midst of the throne, shall
Right.
feed them.
Right. So what is it that the 144,000, starting from those who are worshipping from the door entrance, that's Jerusalem, far from what Samaria is doing, but those who are worshipping from the door of entrance, which are those, the entrance of the sanctuary laws, the feasts, the statutes, and the third hours, the ninth hours, these are the daily. What is it they are feeding on? Revelation 7 verse 17 says, the Lamb is feeding them. That's why the Lamb is standing with the 144,000 on Mount Zion, because he was busy feeding them on the door of the entrance, not where Samaria is. Samaria won't be fed by the Lamb, because the Lamb operates with the prophet at the door of the entrance. This is what happened. Now go to another verse, Isaiah 40, verse 11. Yeah. How does he feed the Lamb? How does he feed? The Lamb is feeding the 144,000, the people who are getting the seal at the door of the entrance. So it depends where you want to go. If you want to go in the kingdom and walk with the Lamb, whithersoever you go, at the door of the entrance, with this sister called Jerusalem, not Samaria. Now let's hear the
40 verse
11.
He shall feed
Right.
his flock like a
Right.
shepherd.
So we are talking about Jerusalem now, because we saw what Samaria is doing. It's neither having a prophet, nothing. That's why he's having all these confusing things that he's following. But here we are seeing this sister called Jerusalem. Her children are being fed by the Lamb. Yeah, at the door of the entrance. How? Through a prophet. Now, what else? Here, the same verse 11.
He shall feed his
Right.
flock like a shepherd.
He feeds this flock under this sister Jerusalem like a shepherd. Where? At the door with the statutes and judgments, everything he has given his prophets. That's what he's feeding his flock. Now, go to another verse. Isaiah 26, verse 6. We enjoy being with this sister Jerusalem because the flock is being fed by Christ. When he said in Exodus chapter 29 that there I will meet you, there I will, at the door of the entrance, I'll sanctify the congregation. How does he sanctify? By feeding with the word of God. Now we are in a statute. We are in one of the statutes in the feast. We are at the door of the entrance, brethren. We are at the door of the... Who is feeding us? The Lamb will feed us with the word of God. Right? Listen to that. Isaiah chapter 26, verse 6. Yeah?
The foot shall tread it down,
Right?
even the feet of the poor,
Right?
and the steps of the needy.
Right?
The way of the just is uprightness.
Right.
Thou most upright.
Go to verse 1 and 2 and enjoy there. Verse 1 and 2 in chapter 26.
In that day shall this song be sung in the land of Judah.
Listen, where we are now going 3 times a year, in that day we will sing this song. Let's hear what song are we singing. Right?
We have a strong city. Salvation
We
will,
have a strong city, which is Jerusalem.
salvation will
Salvation.
God appoint for walls and bulwarks.
Right?
Open ye the gates,
Open the gate.
that the righteous nation...
So when you are going 3 times a year, God is instructing the gates, the borders, everywhere, where you go to worship, opening the gates, right? Listen,
that the righteous nation which keepeth the truth may enter in.
only to open from those who are keeping the statutes, passing over with the prophet, fed at the door of the entrance, This is what God instructs. Open the gates, that the righteous nation, the righteous, because we saw why these statutes should be kept in the commandments, for righteousness, for protection, for our blessings. We saw that in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 24 to 25. So now he says, open the gates, that this righteous nation should come, should go in to worship God at the door of the entrance in Jerusalem. Did you hear that? Now go again, Proverbs chapter 10, verse 21. Let's just enjoy all these verses. When you are now reading on your own, you know now where you are. The plane is on its radar now. You know which sister you belong to. Not Samaria. You belong to the sister called Jerusalem. Now listen to that. In Proverbs 10, verse 21.
The lips of the righteous,
The lips of the righteous.
the lips of the righteous
Right.
feed many.
Read it again.
The lips of the righteous
Right.
feed many,
They feed many.
but fools die for want of wisdom.
Listen, there is want of wisdom in Samaria. The Jeroboam, when you saw the quotation from the Spirit of Prophets volume, when we studied the other time at night, go back to the video where the question and answer on the Feast of Tabernacle. You see that quotation, it says, this incident where Jeroboam was ordaining feast outside Jerusalem, in Bethel, on a wrong date, it led the whole congregation of the 10 tribes of Israel into idolatry, into its idolatrous practices. Now he says, those under this sister Jerusalem, open the gates, because they are coming to feed at the door of the entrance. Open their gates, so that these righteous people can come and enjoy, because the law shall proceed out of Zion. Right? So that's why you meet now all these verses in the Old Testament. They are talking of this sister, Jerusalem. Right? Let me give you another verse so you can enjoy. Let's just enjoy Micah 7, verse 14. Right?
7 verse 14. Feed thy people with thy rod,
Right?
the flock of thine heritage, which dwell solitarily in wood,
Right?
in the midst of Carmel. Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead,
Right.
as in the days of old.
So you see, when these people are well fed, but we have been told that they are also fed by the rod. So that's why you are finding even, I will have a full session of learning how it is to feed on the rod. That's God is talking about, to feed that people on the rod. But what we find with the Samaria, it's got no nourishment. So what is there is a lot of abominations being introduced instead of being nourished. One of the most prominent sin of Samaria. Do you want to know one of the prominent sin? Let me tell you today. Let me tell you the abominations that Samaria will have. There's one most prominent sin. Yeah? Is private interpretation. They will interpret everything privately without a thus saith the Lord. Private interpretation of prophecies, even Daniel and Revelation. Private interpretations, yeah? And things that relate to the later days. Private interpretation. That's why they are waiting to walk in the cloud without even going to the kingdom. And when they say, okay, anytime Christ can come, you ask Samaria. Samaria, you say Christ is coming now, Samaria. So when is the time of trouble? Such as never was. Samaria has no clue. Because what he feeds, Jeroboam is feeding the 10 tribes with private interpretation of wrong things, especially the prophecies pertaining to the last days, right? The prophecies pertaining to the 144,000, yeah? Some, you know what some say in Samaria, they say there are only 144,000 who are going to be saved. That doesn't even talk about the second fruits. It's just the first fruits. Why? Because they don't even know that the language of the first fruit is coming from the feast, from the statutes. So Samaria has private interpretation. Let me tell you one thing: the establishment of the kingdom, they've missed it. Why? Because they're not at the door of the sanctuary, where the voice of God will prepare His own for the feast, for the kingdom, the feast which will usher in the kingdom. And even Sister White is saying in 399 Great Controversy that even the date of the coming of Christ is there in the feast. Samaria has nothing because it does not want to worship at the door of the entrance, right? The feast, they will tell you that they were nailed. That's another thing, another sin there. And then also, what Samaria does not know and does not even believe, how often you can tell Samaria about it, is about Ezekiel 9. That one, Samaria won't believe. Like it was with the people in the antediluvian era, in the time of Noah. They did not believe that the rain was going to come up until the rain started. That's when they started to believe, when it was too late. Samaria does not even hear a sound of Ezekiel 9 that is going to come. You will even laugh at it. Laugh. So you find the purification of the church by Ezekiel 9, Samaria doesn't know. And also, Samaria does not know about the gathering process. Yeah, Samaria doesn't even speak about this gathering. When you are being told the people will come from one city to another, and let's go speedily to worship before the Lord, I will go also. There's no clue about all these prophecies. Samaria, because it's not at the door where the voice of God is uttering, where the law, where the testimonies, where the prophet will be informed at the door of the entrance to prepare a people who walk with Christ whithersoever he calls. You understand? Samaria doesn't that. So they only rejected 1888, but when they rejected 1888, that's why you find they don't even have the fourth angel and the fifth. They missed all that. Samaria has missed all that. The identity of who is Jerusalem and who is Jude, who is Jerusalem and who is Samaria. Now we have left one more child, Sodom. One more sister, Sodom. And because we have left Sodom, I don't want to drain your brain. We meet on Sabbath. Who is Sodom? Who is Sodom? Sodom needs a full day on its own. Who is Sodom? We have dwelt much on Samaria, dwelt much on Jerusalem. But there's a third sister. We should deal much with this sister. They are all in the house of God. Sodom. These characters, Samaria, Jerusalem, Sodom. Who belongs to them? Who belongs? You should be able to know where you belong. And Samaria also should be able to know. Sodom, we have not talked much about Sodom. We are going to tackle Sodom tomorrow. If you will be there tomorrow, we will meet at 10 o'clock tomorrow, talking about Sodom. Who is Sodom? Who is Sodom? May God bless the Feast of Tabernacle.